The girl came in from the rain alone, 7 years old, red raincoat soaked through, no one behind her. Her eyes swept the room once and stopped on Kang Tae-jun. Not away from him, at him. She crossed the room, rose onto her toes, and whispered, "Please pretend you're my dad. Now." Tae-jun's hand stopped mid-air over his tea. His face went cold. His eyes moved past her to the glass door. A black SUV sat idling at the curb. 3 men in tactical gear stepped out, checking their waistbands. He looked back at the girl. One bead in her braids caught the light differently. He leaned in slightly. Military-grade titanium. A tracker. He pulled her backpack onto the seat beside him. "Eat. Don't look back. I'll handle the monsters." The men pushed open the door. They had no idea they'd just walked into their own graveyard. Kang Tae-jun had not chosen this life the way most men in it had. He hadn't grown up hungry, hadn't been recruited off a street corner, hadn't clawed his way up through desperation. He had been selected quietly, deliberately, the way a blade is chosen from a rack. At 19, the elders of the Kang Syndicate had seen something in him that he hadn't yet seen in himself. Not anger, not ambition, stillness. In a world that ran on chaos, stillness was the rarest weapon of all. 22 years later, that stillness had built him an empire. 3 legitimate businesses as cover. 12 city officials on retainer. A network that moved through Koreatown like blood through a body, invisible, essential, everywhere. The LAPD had a file on him. The FBI had a thicker one. Neither had ever put him in a courtroom. He was 41 years old and he was tired in a way that sleep couldn't touch. Tonight was supposed to be nothing. Tea. Silence. 20 minutes of being a man with no name and no weight. He had sent his security detail to the cars, told Park Dae-ho to go home to his wife. Walked the last half block in the rain because the air smelled clean and his lungs needed something honest. Hanul had been his sister's favorite restaurant. He came here on the anniversary of her death every year, sat in the same booth, ordered the same tea, stayed exactly 20 minutes. It was the closest thing to grief he still allowed himself. The anniversary was yesterday. He had come back tonight because 20 minutes hadn't been enough, and he didn't know what to do with that. He was still sitting with that thought when the door opened and the girl walked in. He watched her the way he watched everything, without expression, without movement, cataloging, the red raincoat, the backpack straps white-knuckled against her chest, the eyes moving across the room with a terror that was too focused, too directional, to be simple fear of the dark or the rain. She wasn't lost. She was hunted. Tae-jun recognized it immediately because he had seen it before in informants, in witnesses, in people who had seen something they weren't supposed to see and were now running from the weight of knowing it. There was a particular quality to that kind of fear. It didn't scatter. It aimed. Her eyes found him and aimed. He watched her cross the room, watched the hostess move to intercept and miss, watched every other person in the restaurant fail to register what was happening 2 feet from their dinner plates. She stopped at his booth, rose onto her toes, and whispered her impossible request against the side of his face. He felt her breath, warm, trembling. "Please pretend you're my dad. Now." His hand stopped over his tea. The cold moved through him, not like anger, not like danger, more like clarity. The sudden, complete resolution of a blurred image into sharp focus. His eyes moved to the door. The black SUV, the 3 men stepping out with the particular deliberateness of people who were not police. Cleaners. He looked back at the girl. Took 3 seconds unhurried, precise to read the details she couldn't know she was giving him. The backpack was military spec, not a child's bag. The raincoat was 2 sizes too large, hastily grabbed. She had been running for hours, maybe longer. And there in her braids, near the left temple, one bead that sat differently than the others, heavier. The surface catching the amber light with a dull, metallic certainty. Military-grade titanium, a tracker. They weren't scanning the restaurant for a child. They were following a signal. Tae-jun reached across and lifted the backpack off her shoulders in one smooth motion, tucking it against the booth wall behind him. He slid his phone from his pocket, and without looking down, sent a single character to Park Dae-ho, a period. Their signal for, "Come now." Silent. Armed. Then he looked at the girl, this 7-year-old, who had walked into the most dangerous room in Koreatown and handed him the weight of her life, without knowing what she was carrying. "Eat," he said quietly. "Don't look back. I'll handle the monsters." She slid into the booth across from him, reached for the untouched bowl of rice, and picked up the spoon with both shaking hands. The men pushed through the door. The lead cleaner's name was Silas. Tae-jun didn't know that yet. But he knew the type. 40, maybe 42. Former military, the way he distributed his weight when he walked, gave it away. Heel to toe, economical, always ready to pivot. The kind of man who had transitioned from government work into something that still used government skills but no longer filed reports with anyone accountable. Dangerous, disciplined, and walking directly toward his booth. The two men behind Silas spread without being signaled, one drifting toward the kitchen corridor, one positioning near the bar. Clean coverage. A half-empty Koreatown restaurant at 11 p.m. was nothing to them. Taejun noted all of it in the time it took Silas to cross half the room. He still didn't look up. Across the table, the girl had stopped pretending to eat. The spoon was motionless in her hand, hovering over the rice bowl. Her eyes were fixed on the table with the rigid concentration of a child trying very hard to follow instructions she was terrified of failing. Don't look back. She wasn't looking back, but her jaw was set with a determination that had no business existing on a 7-year-old's face. Hey, Taejun's voice was barely above a murmur. Not soft, just controlled. Breathe. She breathed. One small, shuddering inhale. What's your name? Her eyes flicked up to his. Journey. How old are you, Journey? 7. A pause. And a half. Something moved across his face. Gone before it became anything identifiable. Eat the rice. She ate the rice. Silas reached the booth and stopped. Close enough that Taejun could have touched him without fully extending his arm. The distance of a man who used proximity as pressure. Taejun looked up slowly. The flat, patient regard of a man who had been interrupted and was deciding how much of his attention the interruption deserved. He gave Silas very little. You're in someone's way, Taejun said. Silas didn't move. His eyes went to Journey, a quick, clinical assessment, then back to Taejun. Just looking for a lost kid. Separated from her group outside. We've been looking for about an hour. That so? She come in here alone? Taejun let the silence sit for exactly 3 seconds. Then, she came in with me. Silas looked back at Journey. She was eating rice and examining the table. He processed the picture, the child, the man, the domesticity of the scene and weighed it against whatever he'd been briefed. She yours? Is there a reason that's your business? A beat. Something shifted behind Silas's eyes. Not retreat recalculation. We're just trying to get her home safe. She is home safe. Taejun picked up his tea. Good night. Silas didn't move immediately. That was the tell. A man with a clean conscience leaves when he's been dismissed. Silas stood 4 seconds longer than he should have, his eyes making one final pass. Not at Journey's face, at her hair. Taejun felt the shift like a change in air pressure. Silas knew about the bead. He was now standing 18 inches away, doing the math on whether the man across from him was an obstacle or a corpse. Under the table, Taejun's right hand rested open against his thigh, 2 inches from the piece holstered at his hip. He wouldn't draw a knot here. Not with Journey across the table. Not with civilians who would become collateral in the time it took. But his hand was there. His phone buzzed once against the cushion. Park Dae-ho. Outside. Positioned. Taejun looked up at Silas one final time. And for just a moment, he let the mask slip. Not much. Just enough for Silas to see what lived behind the stillness. Silas saw it. He took 1 step back. Enjoy your dinner, he said flatly, turned and walked to the door. His 2 men followed without a word. Taejun watched the black SUV through the glass. Idling. Not leaving. Waiting. Journey's voice came quietly from across the table. Are they gone? Taejun looked at her. At the exhaustion behind her eyes that no 7-year-old should carry. For now, he said. He typed 4 words to Park Dae-ho. Bring the car around. The SUV hadn't moved. Parked at an angle that covered both the main entrance and the side street. Silas wasn't gone. He was regrouping. Probably running Taejun's face through whatever database a rogue government unit had access to at 11 p.m. 4 minutes. Maybe 5. He had less time than that. He looked at Journey. Both hands flat on the table now. Fingers spread, the way children sit when they're trying very hard to be brave and running low on the resources to sustain it. She hadn't removed her raincoat. Ready to run. She had been ready to run for a long time. Journey. He kept his voice level. Who brought you here tonight? Her eyes came up to his, measuring him not for threat, but for truth. Deciding whether he kept promises, or made them to get what he wanted. She took her time deciding. Nobody, she said. I came by myself. My dad told me to run and don't stop and find somewhere with lots of lights and lots of people. She swallowed. This had the most lights. Taejun absorbed that. Told me to run. Past tense. He didn't ask the follow-up question. Not yet. She was holding herself together with everything she had, and he would not be the thing that broke it. Smart man, he said. Good choice. Something in her face loosened, just slightly. His phone buzzed. Park Dae-ho. 2 minutes out. Kitchen exit clear. He stood, buttoned his jacket, picked up the backpack and held it naturally at his side. Then he looked down at Journey. We're going to walk to the kitchen. Slowly, like we've done it 100 times. She slid out of the booth without question, stood beside him. The top of her head reached his ribcage. He did something then that surprised even himself. He reached down and took her hand. Not a grip, not a restraint. Just a hand. Offered. Waiting. She took it. Her fingers were cold and small, and they wrapped around two of his with complete, devastating trust. He kept his face neutral, kept his breathing even, kept walking. The kitchen was loud and hot and indifferent to them. Steam, clatter, the sharp smell of sesame oil and garlic. The head chef looked up, saw Taejun's face, and looked immediately back down. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved to stop them. Park Dae-ho was at the service exit, engine running. He took one look at the child holding Taejun's hand and had the remarkable professionalism to say absolutely nothing. He held the rear door open. Taejun guided Journey in first, slid in beside her. The door closed. Safe house, Taejun said. Silver Lake, not Culver City. Park Dae-ho pulled out. 3 blocks away, Journey spoke. They're following us. The gray one. 2 cars back. Taejun didn't turn around. I know. How do you know? Same way you do. He looked at her. Your father teach you that? She nodded. He said always count the cars that make the same turns you make. Taejun held her gaze for a moment. What does your father do? She was quiet for 3 seconds. The city moved past the rain-blurred windows, neon and wet asphalt, and Los Angeles refusing to sleep. He was a journalist, she said. Was. The word sat between them like something dropped and not picked up. Taejun turned to Park Dae-ho. Take the 110. Exit exposition. Lose the gray car before we change direction. Copy. He turned back to Journey. She was watching the city the way her father had taught her. Counting, cataloging, memorizing turns. 7 years old, carrying a dead man's secret, holding herself together with a composure that made something tighten in Taejun's chest. He reached across and carefully pulled the hood of her raincoat up over her braids, covering the bead, buying them time. Get some rest, he said quietly. You're safe for now. She leaned against the seat and closed her eyes with the absolute exhaustion of a child who had been terrified for too long. Within 60 seconds, she was asleep. Taejun looked at her. Then out the rear window at the gray car, still 2 vehicles back. Whoever sent you, he thought. You should have sent more. The gray car was good. Not great, but good. It maintained distance without losing them, switched lanes with just enough delay to look casual, never got close enough to pressure. Surveillance training specifically different from pursuit training. They weren't trying to stop the car. They were trying to know where it went. That distinction mattered. It meant Silas still needed Journey alive, which meant Taejun had a window small, closing, but there. Dae-ho. Already on it. Park Dae-ho's eyes were calm in the rear view. He took the 110 on-ramp at normal speed, merged without drama, settled into the middle lane. The gray car followed 30 seconds later. Patient. Professional. Slauson exit, Taejun said. Full speed. Don't signal. At the last possible second, the concrete divider already filling the windshield, Park Dae-ho cut across 2 lanes and hit the exit ramp hard. The tires bit into wet asphalt like tearing paper. Journey shifted against the seat, but didn't wake. Behind them, the gray car overshot the exit. Brake lights flared red in the rain. Too late. 3 minutes before they reposition, Taejun said. Go. Park Dae-ho took them through industrial side streets south of Exposition, through a warehouse district, where the streetlights had been broken long enough nobody remembered reporting them, through an underpass that didn't appear on most GPS maps, because it had been built as a utility corridor and repurposed by people who needed roads that didn't exist officially. 2 minutes later, they were heading north on a street with no logical relationship to where they had exited the freeway. The gray car was gone. Taejun sat back, one controlled breath. He looked at the backpack on his lap. A tracker meant Silas had a receiver. Losing the car bought time, not safety. The moment they stopped moving, the signal would tighten its radius and find them again. He needed to remove the bead, but not here, not in a moving car in the dark. It was woven into her braids, removing it without waking her, without frightening her, without damaging whatever the titanium casing protected required light and stillness, and her cooperation. It required trust he hadn't fully earned yet. Silver Lake, how long? 8 minutes. Journey woke when the car stopped. All at once, the way children wake when their body registers change before their mind does. Her eyes opened, found the unfamiliar ceiling, and for one terrible second panic moved across her face. "Hey," his voice. Immediate. "You're still with me." Her eyes found his. The panic receded, filed away for later when there was space for it. "We're here?" she asked. "We're here." The Silver Lake safe house looked indistinguishable from every other narrow 2-story building on the block. A lemon tree in the front yard that a neighbor had planted 30 years ago and that Tae-jun had never removed because it was the best cover a safe house could have the appearance of someone who tended things. Inside, clean, sparse, functional. A kitchen, a main room, 2 bedrooms, a security panel behind the hallway mirror monitoring 6 camera feeds covering every approach. Park Dae-ho swept it in 90 seconds. Clear. Tae-jun set the backpack on the kitchen table, looked at Journey standing in the middle of the room, taking in her surroundings with eyes that were far too old for her face. "Are you hungry?" She shook her head. "Tired?" A small shrug, which meant yes. "I need to look at your hair first," he said. "The bead. I need to take it out. Is that okay?" She reached up and touched it instinctively, finding it without searching. Her father had told her it was there. She lowered her hand, nodded. He pulled a chair to the center of the room, directly under the overhead light. She sat. He crouched behind her, this man who had ordered the destruction of entire operations, who had built an empire on the architecture of fear, and with focused, careful hands he began to work the bead loose from her braids. She sat perfectly still. Outside, somewhere across the city, a black SUV was turning around, and Silas was making a phone call he had hoped he wouldn't have to make. The bead came loose at 12:43 a.m. Tae-jun held it between his thumb and forefinger under the light. Smaller than it had seemed in the restaurant, no larger than a pencil eraser. Perfectly spherical, the titanium casing seamless except for a hairline seam along its equator. No visible port, no markings. Expensive. Custom fabricated. The tracker was the decoy. What lived inside the casing was the real cargo. He set it on the kitchen table. Journey watched him from the chair, fingers moving unconsciously to the small absence in her braids. "Your father put that in your hair," Tae-jun said. "Not a question." "The morning he sent me away." She paused. "He said it was the most important thing in the world right now. He said when I found someone I could trust, they'd know what to do with it. When I found someone I could trust, a journalist running from a rogue government unit had sent his daughter into the night alone. Not to the police compromised, not to a colleague too exposed. Somewhere random, unpredictable. He had told her to find a room full of people and find someone who looked like they could handle monsters. She had found a mafia boss. Whether that was catastrophically bad luck or the sharpest instinct the man had ever had, Tae-jun hadn't decided yet. He opened the backpack. Inside, a water bottle, a granola bar, a spare shirt, and beneath all of it, wrapped in a plastic sleeve sealed with electrical tape, a photograph, and a folded note. He unfolded the note. A name, a government agency, 12 shipping container identification numbers. And at the bottom, in the tight, deliberate script of a man writing something that needed to survive him, "The key is in the bead. The bead unlocks the drive. The drive ends all of it. Keep her safe. Marcus Webb." He read it twice. Set it down. He picked up the photograph. A man mid-30s, lean, with Journey's same dark eyes standing in front of a cargo terminal. Behind him, partially visible between 2 containers, a vehicle, government plates, and leaning against it, face half-turned from the camera but identifiable to anyone who knew where to look, a man Tae-jun recognized. He set the photograph face down on the table. The shipping container numbers, the government plates, a rogue tactical unit tracking a 7-year-old girl through a rainstorm for a titanium bead. Webb hadn't just found evidence of a crime. He had found the architecture of one built over years, using government resources, hiding inside legitimate cargo operations, and he had encoded the key into a sphere the size of a pencil eraser and sewn it into his daughter's hair before they came for him. Tae-jun understood now why Silas had made that phone call. This was bigger than Silas. "Mr. Kang." He looked up. "You can call me Tae-jun," he said. She considered that. "Is my dad okay?" The question landed and stayed. He held her gaze. He had spent 20 years never lying about important things, not from conscience, but because lies about important things had structural weaknesses that collapsed under pressure. He was not going to start with a 7-year-old who had already proven she could handle more than he'd expected. "I don't know yet," he said. "But I'm going to find out." Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She nodded once. "He taught me to be brave," she said quietly. He said brave doesn't mean not scared. It means scared and still going. Tae-jun said nothing for a moment. Then he walked to the kitchen, found crackers and peanut butter, and set them in front of her without ceremony. "Eat, then sleep." He picked up the bead. the photograph, the note, "I have work to do." She was already reaching for the crackers. And as he moved toward the back room, he heard her say, barely above a whisper, "Thank you for being my dad tonight." He stopped, didn't turn around, stood in the hallway with his hand against the wall for 3 full seconds. Then he kept walking. Taejun made 4 phone calls between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. But first he sat, just for a moment, 5 minutes, that he allowed himself and no more. He sat in the back bedroom with the door closed, and Marcus Webb's note in his hand, and let the weight of it settle fully before he decided what to do with it. A journalist who had chosen truth over safety. A little girl sent into the dark, carrying her father's last act of courage in her hair. A system built by people who were supposed to protect children, used instead to disappear them. His sister had been 17 when the violence of this world had taken her. Not from his world, from theirs. From the men who wore badges and looked away and let things happen because it was profitable to let things happen. He had built his empire partly out of grief. He had never admitted that to anyone. He set the note down, picked up his phone. 5 minutes, then work. The first call went to Cho, a former NIS analyst operating out of a server room in Alhambra. Taejun read him the 12 container numbers. Cho was silent for 11 seconds. "Where did you get these? Does it matter?" "It matters because 3 correspond to containers flagged internally by customs 18 months ago, then quietly unflagged. Someone with clearance reached in and erased them." "How high?" "High enough that I need 20 minutes, and I need you to never tell me where these numbers came from." "Call me back," Taejun said. The second call was to Park Dae-ho, Ghost Guard, the 4 from the Incheon situation. 2 hours, separate approaches. Copy. The third call went to Seo Yuna, 63, retired, living on a horse property in Ojai that Taejun had purchased for her 11 years ago, his sister's closest friend. The only person alive who spoke to him without calculation in her voice. She answered on the second ring. "I have a child," Taejun said. 7 years old. She needs somewhere safe that isn't connected to me operationally. Is she hurt? No. Scared. Exhausted. Braver than she should have to be. "Bring her when you're ready," Seo Yuna said. "The east room is already made up." She hung up without asking anything else. The fourth call he almost didn't make. He sat with the phone in his hand looking at the photograph at the half-turned face he recognized. Deputy Director Reeves. 4 years running a federal anti-trafficking task force that was, in fact, the trafficking operation. His clearance used to erase the paper trail. His cleaners used as enforcement. Marcus Webb had gotten close enough to encode the proof. Taejun dialed a number he had used twice in 11 years. A federal prosecutor named Park Ji-soo, one of the rare ones who had never appeared in his ledger, never taken a courtesy, never looked away. They existed on opposite sides of a line, and both knew it, and had maintained an unspoken detente built on mutual recognition. She answered cautiously. "This is unexpected. I have something. Not for negotiation, not for immunity." He paused. A journalist named Marcus Webb, a deputy director named Reeves, 12 shipping containers and 4 years of a federal anti-trafficking operation that was the opposite. He paused, and a 7-year-old girl who carried the proof in her hair. The silence was long and specific, not hesitation, but the sound of someone rapidly restructuring their understanding. "Where is the girl?" "Safe." "The proof?" "Being decoded." "I'm going to need everything," she said. "You'll get everything. But first I make sure Silas never gets close to her again. That's mine. What happens after that's yours." A pause. "Agreed." He ended the call. His phone buzzed immediately. "Cho." "How high?" Taejun asked. Cho's voice was flat with the specific flatness of a man who had just seen something that couldn't be unseen. "The highest," Cho said. "The trap took 48 hours to build." Taejun moved Jorni once before dawn, in a vehicle Silas had never seen, to Seo Yuna's property in Ojai. The handoff was brief. Journey stood in the early gray light, holding her backpack, looking between Taejun and the older woman. Seo Yuna crouched to her level. "I have horses. Are you afraid of horses?" Journey considered this seriously. "No." "Good. Come inside." She went without looking back. But at the last second, just before the door closed, she turned and found Taejun's eyes across the distance. He gave her a single nod. She nodded back. Then she went inside. He stood in the driveway 3 seconds longer than necessary. Then he got in the car. The port was Taejun's idea and Cho's architecture. The San Pedro container terminal ran 24 hours, massive, industrial, full of blind spots only someone who had moved things through it illegally would know. Taejun knew everyone. He knew which cameras had the longest rotation gaps, which corridors were monitored by guards who had stopped paying attention around midnight, which sections were acoustically isolated enough that sound didn't carry. Through a deliberately exposed burner, one text, one location coordinate, sent through a channel Cho confirmed Silas was monitoring. He gave them the port. Not Journey's location, not the bead, just the suggestion that a handoff was happening, that the evidence was moving. Silas was disciplined but desperate. Cho's intercept confirmed it. Reeves was applying pressure. The timeline was collapsing. Silas needed to recover the evidence and neutralize the chain of custody before Jisoo's office started pulling threads. Desperate men walked into traps that patient men avoided. They came at 1 a.m., 6 this time. 2 teams of 3, tactical spacing, suppressed weapons. They entered through the south gate using credentials that confirmed the depth of Reeves's reach. Taijun tracked them from a catwalk above container row C, 40 feet up, full sightlines to all 3 approaches. The Ghost Guard's 4 men were distributed across elevated positions, covering the same ground from different angles. They had mapped it the previous afternoon while the port ran its normal operations around them. Daeho's voice in the earpiece. Team 1 passing marker 4. Hold. He waited. Let them move deeper. Let the geometry close. Team 2 at the junction. Now. The port's floodlighting came on in sections sequentially, each bank illuminating another section of the yard, closing the dark spaces Silas's teams were using for cover. Cho had accessed the lighting system remotely from Alhambra. Silas's teams froze. In the sudden flat white light, they were fully exposed. 6 men in tactical gear standing in the open, nowhere to go. The dawning understanding that the environment they had entered was not neutral. 3 of Silas's men made the right decision immediately. Weapons down, hands visible. The other 2 didn't. What followed was brief and controlled, no permanent damage. Taejun needed bodies that could testify. Silas ran. Not toward the exit, toward the water. The port's eastern edge dropped 15 feet to the service dock below. He hit the railing and went over without hesitation. Landed hard, rolled, came up moving toward a boat moored at the end of the pier. Taejun watched from the catwalk. Then he looked at Daeho. Daeho was already moving. They found Silas at the end of the pier 40 seconds later. Mooring line in his hands, 1 foot on the gunwale, when Daeho's voice came out of the dark. Nowhere left. Silas went still, turned slowly. Taejun walked the length of the pier without urgency, hands in his jacket pockets, the harbor wind moving through his hair. He stopped 3 feet away. The 2 men looked at each other in the dark. Silas's jaw worked. Something moved behind his eyes, the arithmetic of loyalty versus survival. Then something else. Something that looked, unexpectedly, like exhaustion. They told us she was a courier, Silas said quietly. Running product for a cartel. That's what we were briefed. A pause. She's 7 years old. Taejun said nothing. Let the silence do its work. Reeves lied to all of us, Silas said. Then help me prove it. The calculation behind Silas's eyes ran its final count. He let go of the mooring line. Silas talked for 3 hours. Names, dates, container numbers that matched Webb's list and then exceeded it. Safe house locations. Reeves's chain of command. The financial architecture that had kept the operation invisible for 4 years, routing proceeds through a federal discretionary fund audited internally by the same people running it. It was thorough. It was devastating. Taejun sent the recording to Park Jisoo at 4:47 a.m. She responded 11 minutes later. Grand jury convenes in 72 hours. Keep the girl safe until then. He set the phone down. Sat alone in the empty warehouse office, after Daeho had taken Silas to a location that would hold him safely until Jisoo's office was ready. The harbor outside had begun its pre-dawn rhythm, the low mechanical groan of cranes starting up, the distant percussion of containers moving. He thought about Marcus Webb. Cho had confirmed it 2 hours ago, quietly. Webb had been found in a storm drain off the 101 4 days before Journey walked into the restaurant. Ruled a hit and run. It had not been a hit and run. Journey didn't know yet. He would have to tell her. He sat with that for a long time. He drove to Ojai as the sun came up. The property looked different in morning light hills, gold and dry, horses moving in the far paddock, the whole scene carrying the piece of a place deliberately removed from the velocity of other things. Seo Yuna met him at the door with coffee and said nothing about the hour or the state of his jacket or the fact that he hadn't slept. She's in the east paddock, Seo Yuna said. Up since 5. He walked around the side of the house. Journey stood at the paddock fence, with both arms hooked over the top rail, watching a brown mare move along the far edge with the patient. Absorbed attention of a child who had found something that required nothing from her. She was wearing borrowed clothes, an old sweater, jeans rolled at the ankle, her braids loose around her shoulders without the bead. She heard him coming and turned, read his face the way she read everything quickly, completely, already preparing herself before he said a word. He stopped beside her at the fence, looked at the mare for a moment, then he told her about her father. Plainly, without softening the shape of it into something it wasn't, because she was Marcus Webb's daughter, and Marcus Webb had raised her to handle truth. He told her what had happened and when. He told her that her father had known the risk, and had chosen it anyway because he believed some things were worth the cost. He told her the cost was not her fault. She listened without moving. When he finished, she gripped the fence rail and looked at the mare and cried, not loudly, not collapsingly, but with the full weight of it, the way people cry when they've been holding something for days and finally find a place safe enough to set it down. He stood beside her and said nothing. After a while, she wiped her face with the back of her hand. Did it work? She asked. His thing, did it work? Yes, Taejun said. It worked. She nodded slowly. Good. He would want to know it worked. He stayed 2 hours. They didn't talk much. Seo Yuna brought food. The morning warmed. At some point, Journey fell asleep on the porch swing with the sun on her face and one hand open against the cushion. Taejun sat in the chair beside her and watched the hills. When it was time to go, he stood slowly, reached into his jacket and removed a small silver coin no larger than a shirt button, a coiled dragon embossed on one side, the only marker his syndicate used. It meant, this person is under my protection. Touch them and answer to me. He set it gently on the armrest beside her open hand. Then he walked to the car. Seo Yuna was at the gate. She looked at him with the expression she reserved for moments when she saw his sister in him. She can stay as long as she needs, Seo Yuna said. I know. He paused. Take care of her. He got in the car. The property shrank in the mirror. Los Angeles reassembled on the horizon, sprawling, indifferent, full of machinery that was now quietly and irreversibly beginning to come apart. One chapter closing, one already beginning. 10 years later, the courtroom was full. It had been full every day of the 7-week trial, reporters in every press seat, legal observers lining the walls, the public gallery packed with people who understood that what was happening inside this room mattered beyond the room itself. United States v. Reeves et al., 17 defendants, 4 years of federal corruption, a trafficking operation that had moved through a government anti-trafficking unit like a parasite through a host, 230 pages of indictment. The lead prosecutor was 22 minutes into her closing argument. Journey Webb moved across the courtroom floor with the unhurried precision of someone who had learned early that deliberateness was its own form of authority. 27 years old. Her father's dark eyes. Her braids pinned back. Charcoal suit, perfectly fitted. She carried a quality of stillness that people who faced her across a courtroom came to understand too late. She stopped in front of the jury. 17 people in this room would like you to believe that what happened inside those containers was an anomaly, she said. The unauthorized action of individuals operating outside their mandate. She paused. The evidence shows you something different. It shows you a system, built deliberately, maintained carefully, protected aggressively. Another pause. And dismantled finally, irrevocably, because one journalist refused to look away. She let her father's name stay in the room without saying it. Some things hit harder when you didn't reach for them. In the public gallery, 3rd row from the back, a man in a dark suit watched. Settled now in a way he hadn't been 10 years ago, like a man who had put down something heavy he had carried too long. The dragon tattoo still visible at the collar. The same modest watch. The same eyes that read every room they entered. Nobody recognized him. That was intentional. He had not come to be seen. He had come because some things you witnessed in person or you didn't really witness at all. Journey's closing ran 40 more minutes. Precise, relentless. Built over years, not just prepared for this case, but constructed slowly from a single devastating truth by a person who had spent a decade learning every tool available to use it with maximum effect. When she finished, the room went very quiet, the kind of quiet that meant something had landed exactly where it was aimed. The jury took 4 hours. Guilty. All 17 counts. All 17 defendants. When the verdict was read, Journey sat completely still for 3 seconds. Then she exhaled once slowly and gathered her papers. Around her, the courtroom erupted. Her co-counsel was saying something. Reporters were already moving. She heard none of it. She was already thinking about the next case. She came out of the courthouse into late afternoon light and stopped on the steps. The city moved below, indifferent as always, full of its own velocity. A clerk appeared at her shoulder. Miss Webb, someone left this at the security desk. No name. He handed her a small evidence bag. Inside, a silver coin, no larger than a shirt button. A coiled dragon embossed on one side. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked out at the street at the last of the afternoon light, catching the glass of the buildings, and something moved across her face. Not quite a smile. Something older than a smile and quieter. She closed her fingers around the coin. "Thank you," she said, not aloud, just to the air, to the city, to the particular silence of a man she knew was somewhere in it, for being my dad that night, somewhere across the city, in a restaurant on Olympic Boulevard that still held his corner booth. Kang Tae-jun set down his tea, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he smiled.